welcome to another podcast of Talking Irish. This is our podcast reviewing the Temple game in which the Notre Dame Fighting Irish were victorious in their season and their home opener, which is their fifth home opening victory in the last 6 years. Notre Dame gave Brian Kelly his 200th win of his career, making him one of the best coaches in recent time because it was a feat that he accomplished in the fifth number of fewest games at 270, and makes him the second youngest major college coach to win 200 games at 51 years and 310 days of age. It was a beautiful day for a game when the temperatures in the mid to upper 70s, and as Notre Dame won the coin toss and elected to receive, everything seemed to be going their way until the first play of the game when Notre Dame was flagged for illegal substitution, having 12 men on the field. Not having their play set was a very big concern off the bat, but that was easily rectified with scores on their first two possessions to take a 14-0 lead. Overall now, Brian Kelly is 29-11 for a .725 winning percentage for the Irish. He has improved his record to 268-2 for a .744 overall percentage as head coach. Although this is Notre Dame's first win against Temple, as it was the first time they've matched up against the Owls, this is Brian Kelly's second win against the Owls, beating them before coming to South Bend. Although the team could have definitely performed a little bit better, there are many highlights not to be overlooked in the first game of the season. Senior quarterback Tommy Rees did have 3 touchdown passes in the first half alone. Rees threw for 346 yards, which was a career high for Tommy Rees. Tommy also had a career long pass of 66 yards for a touchdown to Troy Nicholas, which was also a career-long reception for Troy Nicholas as well. His previous was a 30-yard catch against Purdue last year. DeVaris Daniels had his first career touchdown reception, which was a 32-yard pass from Tommy Rees on the opening passing play of the first quarter for the Irish to take the 7-0 lead. Daniels had a second score on the second drive for the Irish, which was a 32-yard pass for a touchdown as well. Senior captain T.J. Jones also had a breakout game of sorts. It was his first 100-yard receiving game, as he had 130 yards in the game, and he also recorded a 51-yard reception on the second drive for the Irish. Chris Brown, sophomore receiver, had 3 catches in the contest, giving him a career high in receptions in a game. He only had 2 all of last year, so we're expecting continued great things from him. Junior running back Cam McDaniel had 65 yards on 12 carries. Both were career highs for Cam. He ran with some legitimate-looking speed, some great cuts, and definitely his well-known power. Freshman Folston got into the game as well, where he caught a pass in the fourth quarter for a first down. And also Amir Carlisle, who transferred in from USC 2 years ago, looked really good, and he had 68 yards for 9 carries for a 9.7 yards per carry average. I really look forward to seeing this kid run in the future. There were also a few defensive highlights during the game. Defensive end Stephon Tuitt recorded his 15th career sack, moving him into 10th all-time on the Notre Dame sack list. We really look forward to him continuing to increase his sacks during the year. Dan Fox had 10 tackles against Temple, which was a career high for Dan Fox. Surprisingly, that he would never have a 10 or more tackle game in the past, as he's seen the field quite a bit. Carlo Calabrese recovered a fumble on a punt in the fourth quarter, and that was actually his first fumble recovery of his career, and again, a bit surprising. Before we get into some of the meat and potatoes of the game, I do want to share some statistics and make a few comments on just some strict numbers. Notre Dame had 21 first downs versus Temple's 25. So that would make you think that the game was not as close if you looked at some of these numbers, but I think that a lot goes to Notre Dame's bend it, don't break defense, that they will give up yardage, they'll give up some plays, but not the big scoring plays that takes to win a game. Notre Dame, however, did outrush the Temple Owls 188 yards to 134 on 35 attempts to Temple's 29 attempts, and also won the average game for 5.4 yards per carry as opposed to Temple's 4.6 yards per carry. Each team did have a rushing touchdown, and that was Temple's only score of the day. The passing game statistically was the edge for the Irish on offense, passing for 355 yards compared to Temple's 228 yards. The Irish completed 17 passes on 27 attempts, while the Owls completed 23 passes on 47 attempts, and the average per completion was almost 21 yards per completion for the Irish, as opposed to just under 10 yards per completion for the Temple Owls. The Irish also had 3 touchdowns through the air, where the Temple Owls had 0. Notre Dame had 553 total yards of offense, and the Temple Owls had 362. On special teams, the Temple Owls did win the punting matchup, averaging 48 yards per punt with 5 punts. The Irish also had 5 punts for an average of 41.2 yards a punt. On kickoffs, the Irish averaged 64.6 yards a kickoff compared to Temple's 56.5 yards per kickoff, which is not a surprise because Kyle Brenz's leg is very strong, and on his punts, he put several into the end zone that should have been angled out of bounds. And the time of possession goes to the Irish with 31 minutes 53 seconds against the Temple Owls 28 minutes and 7 seconds. As most of you know, Brian Kelly does not see an importance of time possession, so that may or may not be important to the Irish down the road. The other kicking game, the Temple Owls were 0 for 1 in points after, the one being blocked by sophomore Jerron Jones, and they were also 0 2 on field goals. Notre Dame was 4 for 4 on extra points. However, they were 0 2 on field goals. This could be an issue in the future, especially in tight games. As mentioned, the Fighting Irish led the rushing game with 198 yards. It was a diverse running attack with 5 backs outside of Reese running the ball. Carlisle having 7 rushes, McDaniel leading the team with 12 rushes, Atkinson with 8, Folston with 5, and Bryant with 2. Carlisle led the Irish with an average rush of 9.7 yards per rush, followed by Bryant with 6 yards on 2 carries. Atkinson had 1 rush for a touchdown, and Carlisle also led the team with a long of 45 yards. Reese had 1 rush for minus 5 yards, and the total average rush per yard for the Notre Dame running game was 5.4 yards a game. The Temple Owls were held to 4.6 yards per game for a total of 148 yards on 29 carries, and their main runner was Connor Riley, who was their quarterback last year, who had a net of 65 yards and a long of 18, with 1 rushing touchdown from Kenny Harper. Although Reese did have the majority of passes in the game for 16 passes on 23 attempts for 346 yards and 3 touchdowns with a long of 66 yards and 1 sack, Andrew Hendricks got in the game to have 1 completion on 4 passes for 9 yards. Connor Riley was the only Owl to pass the football on Saturday with 23 completions for 46 yards and 1 sack. 7 Irish receivers and backs caught passes during the game, led by T.J. Jones with 6, and 2 touchdowns with Daniels and 1 with Nicholas. Nicholas also had the long reception of the day of 66 yards for an Irish total of 355 yards receiving on 7 passes and 3 touchdowns. The Owls were held to 228 yards on 23 attempts with no passing touchdowns and a long of 26. And again, that goes, I think, back to the defense of bend, don't break, as we review the film as well. The punt return game took a big step forward with 3 returns for 23 yards and a long of 12 by T.J. Jones, and I would think that is not anything to necessarily write home about, but compared to the last 2 years' troubles returning punts, it is a huge step forward. Recognition should also be given to punt coverage teams for the Irish, as they held punt returns and kickoffs from the Temple Owls to moderate gains at best. Statistically, on the defensive side of the ball, nobody from the Irish had a super dominant game, although Dan Fox did lead the team with 10 tackles, 5 solo and 5 assists. Second was fellow linebacker Carlo Calabrese with 9 tackles, and third was Jarrett Grace with 7 tackles. Otherwise, the team pretty much split the rest of the tackles for a total of 61 across the board. The team only had 1 sack on the day by Stephon Tuitt, only 1 tackle for a loss of yards by Dan Fox for a loss of 2 yards, and 1 fumble recovered by Carlo Calabrese, which was on special teams. There was 1 pass breakup on the day by Farley and 1 block kick by Jerron Jones. So statistically, the defense spread the work around with no one specifically dominating. Prince Shembo probably led the way in terms of pressure with 5 quarterback hurries and seemed to be causing a menace for the offensive line every time he was in the game. He has been known to have a very high motor, and he showed that on Saturday. Overall, offensively, the Irish seem to have a hit-or-miss rhythm going on offense. Their basic play drives were touchdown, touchdown, punt, punt, miss field goal, touchdown, touchdown, miss field goal, punt, 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 and end of game. Fired up very quickly with 2 touchdowns, and then 2 touchdowns later on, sandwiched between 2 missed field goals, showing that there's still points left on the board with the Irish offense. Okay, let's take a look now of an overall look at the game from a outside perspective, not just by the numbers. I would have to say you would take the win. Overall, it was good, and I think the best thing I would say is that nobody got hurt. We got to rotate in some players that wouldn't play in a close game, and for the first game of the season, being able to evaluate some of the freshmen. 10 freshmen saw the field on Saturday, and we got to definitely evaluate some different schemes. Brian Kelly did say in his post-game press conference that he was happy that they were able to do things without opening up the entire playbook to show their full hand, especially probably with Michigan coming up next week. You didn't really want to do that. So overall, it was definitely a good win. You had to be happy with the play of Tommy Rees overall. I think, just in general, his miscues were overthrows, which generally I think you want an overthrow as opposed to underthrowing the ball. More interceptions happen with quarterbacks throwing into coverage underneath, as opposed to overthrowing possibly out of bounds, which seemed to be Tommy's issue. So I think those are fixable issues, some timing issues with his receivers that he's going to have to continue to work on with some chemistry. So I'm looking forward to Tommy being able to be able to improve his numbers. Obviously, with the career yardage passing day, you can't say he had a bad day whatsoever. And of course, no turnovers helps a lot. Not that Temple is any sort of defensive juggernaut. We were able to move the ball well. The offensive line seemed to pretty much be in control from start to finish. Ronnie Stanley might have been the weak link in that, but boy, not much at all. You see some room for improvement, but I think overall that offensive line just seemed to control the line of scrimmage, push people around. And again, it's against Temple. We're not talking against a super high-ranked defensive line. Troy Nicholas did a fantastic job blocking from the tight end position, and I don't care if it's a defensive back or a linebacker, they're going to lose that one-on-one battle trying to go against Hercules. I mean, he's just too strong, too big, and really too fast for probably defensive ends. So he's just a mismatch on a number of levels. So I'm looking forward to that. I did mention there was no injuries. Devaris Daniels did have a groin pull that was quoted as a slight groin from Kelly, so I don't think there's going to be any issues there. He is expected to return for Michigan. Kelly, however, did say that Devaris could have returned to the game if needed, but obviously wasn't needed. It was an opportunity for Chris Brown to get a few more reps and show what he could do. On the defensive side of the ball, switching over for a moment, talk about some young talent getting in the game, is Jalen Smith coming in to play outside linebacker. And from my observations of him, he played solid. Brian Kelly said that he thought that at times Smith played like a freshman, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, he is his first time playing college ball, but he definitely has the size, the speed, and the motor to get after it. I think he'll learn concern definitely in some of the passing defenses. He's going to have to pick that up. I'm sure the game is moving a lot faster, and he's definitely going against 10 times better talent than I ever saw in high school. But it was obviously a good opportunity for him to get on the field, kind of shake off any nervousness he may have of playing on a big stage, and I look for him to only get better. So I wouldn't say it was any way, shape, or form a bad game for him. I do feel our defensive backs played fair at best. Again, I think a real statement of their bend don't break philosophy. I think against a better passing team with better receivers and a better quarterback, we could have been in for a very long day. They played well when they had to, and they played well enough to win. Our linebackers did well against the run. Against the pass, I felt that there's definitely still room for improvement. Temple's a tough team to really gauge how good or how much improvement we need to make, but they played well. I think Temple played as well as they could. I think they probably played a little bit better than the score had shown, offensively at least. Just our defense is just too good for them. However, if it was a Michigan week 1, there may have been a different outcome, at least in terms of the score. Sticking with the linebackers, Prince Shembo is playing a lot of snaps. He has the motor, the heart, and the conditioning to do so. He is a very well-conditioned athlete. He's very motivated. You hear it from every coach, and I believe Kelly said this again at his press conference. He does not like to come off the field, and there's really no need for him to come off the field. We have a number of players that can step in. I know Romeo wants to get on the field and wants to have an opportunity to play, and I'm very excited to see him play, but I just think Prince Shembo is such a talent. I love seeing him on the field, and I look forward to him really, really stepping up in the future. Flipping back to offense, I think what we saw in the receiving core was the best that we could hope for. Some of the passes being spread around. T.J. Jones looked good, as he was supposed to be the leader of the team in regards to receiving core. He played well, and obviously with Troy Nicholas's touchdown reception looked solid. A lot of very good plays. I don't know if I saw a lot of great plays. I really liked seeing the way Cam McDaniel ran the ball in general. I really enjoyed the way that Amir Carlisle ran the football. I think our running game looks solid, and I'll say our first 3 being George Atkinson, Amir Carlisle, and Cam McDaniel. George Atkinson took one great shot that I just immediately looked across the room to another Irish fan, and we both immediately said that reminded us of Calabrese's hit on him earlier in the blue and gold game. So he apparently has not learned to keep his pads down at all times. Cam McDaniel really looks like he's expanded his game, and Amir Carlisle showed some fantastic bursts of greatness, and I looked at maybe him being the number 1 tool right now in the Irish backfield, but I think the 1, 2, 3 punch is definitely George Atkinson III, Cam McDaniel, and Amir Carlisle. Folston and Bryant came in for a couple touches each. Looked good, nothing great, but definitely think there's some potential back there if needed to get some rest, to mix it up a little bit coming out of the backfield for defenses. So it is exciting for what our offense can do. Great offensive line, good running backs with some potential for some great running backs coming up in the games to come. I would say the biggest disappointments of the day, however, are probably still in special teams. I think our returns could have been a little bit better. I'm still hoping to see that produce some big plays. There's opportunity for a big return, either whether it be punts or kickoffs, to really put your offense into a good position, really help flip the field on a punt, or just really get a spark going. And even a score really gets momentum going. So it's going to be important for the Irish to step up and make sure their returns are contributing in a number of ways. Field goals going 0 for 2, that's something that's going to need to improve and improve quickly. That 6 points that was left on the board that in a closer game could cost the Irish a game, and with Michigan coming up next week, every point's going to matter, and we're going to have to get that figured out pretty quickly if we're to win close games. After the special teams play, again, the overthrowing of passes by Tommy Reese is something that was a concern, but I think that is fixable and will continue to improve with working on chemistry with his receivers. So I wouldn't say there's a lot to be disappointed or concerned about outside of the field goal kicking situation, but there is a lot of opportunity for improvement, whether it be the offensive line. Again, I think Ronnie Stanley's still learning his game. I think the running backs are still trying to figure out who's going to do what. Receivers are still learning, Tommy's timing. Defensively, I think we could do a much better job getting closer coverage, and whether it be a defensive back and linebacker. So with only one sack, I think there's opportunity for even the defensive line. Lewis Nix had said that he feels he could play better, and I think that could be a scary thing. With Michigan and their focus turning to Michigan next week, I think everyone's taken their 24 hours to celebrate this win, and that's kind of a Kelly rule. You have 24 hours to celebrate or 24 hours to mourn. Obviously, we had more than 24 hours to mourn from Alabama, but we are now focused on Michigan, which I think the players will probably be watching a lot of film, talking to their position coaches to figure out how they're going to improve and get ready for next week. So Temple is definitely behind us. It's a win. Starting 1-0 is better than starting 0-1, and obviously any slip-ups or major injuries against Temple would have been the big problem in Week 1. So we're past Week 1. We're 1-0, moving on to Michigan. So we will be back later in the week to take a preview look at our rivalry game against Michigan, which will be our last one, at least for a while. And for those of you who don't remember, well, not necessarily be there, but remember, Michigan was the very first team Notre Dame football ever played to, and we'll talk more about that later in the week. Until then, keep an eye, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. And for now, go Irish.